لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لله تعالى فأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. I praise Allah, I glorify Him, and I thank Him, and I ask Allah to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to protect his Muslim nation. I testify that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah, and I testify that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is his messenger. So we're going to continue on for a little bit more before we finalize the session. And I just want to remind everyone the great reward that is associated with acquiring the knowledge about Islam, and especially the obligatory knowledge, because it is our personal obligation. And the scholars, they have said that the best way to spend your time is with the knowledge, whether that was learning it, or memorizing it, or reviewing it, or teaching it, or authoring it, or writing it down, or documenting it. The best way that you can spend your time is with the knowledge of Islam. So dedicate yourselves to the knowledge of Islam as much as you can. Replace the idle, shallow, hollow, and oftentimes destructive entertainment with something that will benefit you in the hereafter. Continuing on with what the author was talking about, and that Allah Ta'ala is the only one that creates, that Allah Ta'ala is the only creator. He said, Allah is the only one who creates. قال الله تعالى لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 286 means every individual self will be rewarded by Allah for the good deeds it acquired and will be accountable for the sins it committed. So we say all that to say that our actions and what we do and ourselves and the things that we use and our instruments and the results of our actions, all of that is created by Allah. Our thoughts, our intentions, our organs, our limbs, these are created by Allah. Our desires, they're created by Allah. And so the things that we do with our own voluntary decision, the things that we do with our own will, we're held accountable for that. So even though we did not create our deeds, even though we're not the creators of our intentions or our deeds or our bodies or the things in the external world, but if we do something with our will, then that thing we're going to be held responsible for it, even though Allah is the one who created it. So for example, even though Allah is the creator of the devil and of his words and his actions and his blasphemy, the devil is the one that will be held accountable for his deeds. Because even though he didn't create it, but he did it with his own will, so it's attributed to him from that aspect. So dice el autor, Allah es el único que crea. قال الله تعالى لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت. Surah Al-Baqarah, el versículo 286 significa: cada individuo será recompensado por Allah por los actos buenos que adquirió y será responsable por los pecados que cometió. Eso significa que aunque nosotros no somos creadores de nuestras acciones, pero nosotros vamos a ser responsables por lo que nosotros hacemos con nuestras voluntades. Entonces, Dios es el creador del diablo y el creador de los malos hechos del diablo y de la blasfemia del diablo, pero el diablo va a ser responsable y culpable por sus acciones en el día del juicio. Now the author is going to talk about the kalam of Allah, specifically focusing on that because it is an important case. It's something important to understand. And in the past, there were some people that tried to stir confusion and sedition, specifically about this subject. And so the author is going out of his way to clarify this matter. Al-Kalam, the Kalam, speech of Allah, is without a beginning like the rest of His attributes, because He, the Exalted, is unlike all the creations in His being, attributes, and doings. And when we say there is no similarity between Allah and the creation, when we say Allah is not like us in any way, we mean the reality of Allah is unlike us, the attributes of Allah are unlike us, and the doings of Allah are unlike us. Now, even though we use the word doings, referring to Allah, it's not with the same meaning that we use doings for us. So our doings are actions. We move, for example. We move our hand to turn on the light. We press the button, for example, to turn on the light. We turn the key to turn on the car. We push the pedal to accelerate the car. We tap the screen of our phone to type. We use the pen and the paper and we move our hand to write. For example, we throw a punch with our hand, etc. These are our actions. We tell, for example, the ones that we love, that we love them. Those are our actions. We, for example, see someone struggling and we help them. Someone, for example, appeals to our kindness and mercy and we're merciful and kind to them. These are our actions. We hold the door open for someone so that they can come in. Those are our actions. That's for us. Those are creative things. The doings of Allah, when we use that term, it doesn't mean actions like pushing a button or turning a key or pressing the accelerator or these things that apply to us. It doesn't mean that. It means that Allah willed for such and such creation to exist, and Allah made it exist with His power. So not in the context of time and the context of changing and events, no. So when we say that Allah is attributed with doings, what does that mean? It means that person, when they went from being alive to being dead, it's because Allah created death in him and his life ended. And Allah, with His power, made that person go from being alive to not alive. And that is not related to time. It's not related to like before and after and all that. That only applies to us. And before we were alive, and then after we died, then we're dead. But that doing of Allah, Allah willed for that person, for his life to end at such and such point. So the lapsing or the time stamp, all that only applies to us. So Allah Ta'ala, He is unlike the creation in His reality, in His attributes, and in His doings. So there's no similarity between us and Allah. Allah the Exalted is greatly clear of what the unjust ones attribute to Him. The unjust ones are the non-Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, the Hindus, the atheists, every other religion other than Islam. They say about Allah, and they say about what they call God, they say things that are not befitting. And they say about God, for example, that He's attributed with a body. They say about God that He is sitting on the throne. They say about God that He has emotions. They say about God that He has children. So all of those things are not befitting to attribute to Allah. So we as Muslims, we say Allah is exalted beyond what the non-Muslims say about Him. And we say Allah is glorified and He is clear of all those things that the non-Muslims say about Him. Ahora el autor va a hablar acerca de un tema muy importante, por eso el enfoque está en este tema, específicamente en esta parte del libro. Dice el autor, el kalam de Allah es sin principio como todos sus atributos, porque Él, alabado sea, no es similar a ninguna de las creaciones en su realidad, atributos y acciones, o pues hechos. Entonces, el kalam es un término árabe que se está refiriendo al atributo de Dios, cual no es creado y no es una letra, sonido o lenguaje. Con él, con ese atributo, Allah ordena, prohíbe, promete y amenaza. Y también informa. Entonces significa que Dios es atribuido con un atributo que se llama el kalam. Y de pronto algunas personas en español dicen el habla de Allah. Significa que ese es el atributo de Dios con el cual Él prohíbe, ordena, promete y amenaza, pero no es un sonido, no es un idioma, no es una letra, no tiene principio y no tiene fin. Entonces el autor está diciendo que este atributo de Dios, tal como todos los atributos de Dios, son sin principio y sin fin, porque Dios no es como las creaciones, no es similar a ninguna de las creaciones en su realidad, en sus atributos y en sus hechos. Es decir, cuando una persona se muere, es porque fue la voluntad de Dios que esa persona, que su vida termine en ese momento. Y Dios, con su poder, hizo que esa persona se muriera. A eso se refiere los hechos de Dios. Es decir, que fue la voluntad de Dios que esa persona se muriera y Dios hizo que esa persona se muera. Entonces, no es una acción tal como se refiere a nosotros, que nuestras acciones tienen principio, tienen fin, cambian, son una serie de eventos, son movimientos, por ejemplo, pero a Dios no se le atribuye nada de eso. The author said, consequently, la última, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala es enormemente libre de todos los atributos inapropiados que los blasfemadores le atribuyen. Es decir, cualquier imperfección que los no musulmanes le atribuyen a Dios, Dios es enormemente libre de todas esas imperfecciones. Los no musulmanes, por ejemplo los cristianos, dicen que Dios es un padre, es una imperfección. Los cristianos dicen que Dios tiene un cuerpo, que Dios está sentado en el trono, que Dios está en el cielo, que Dios se mueve, que Dios se muere. Entonces todo eso es una imperfección. Entonces Dios es enormemente libre de todos los atributos inapropiados que los blasfemadores le atribuyen, que todas las imperfecciones que los blasfemadores le atribuyen a Dios, Dios es enormemente libre de eso, no es atribuido a Dios. The author said, consequently, the general meaning which is understood from what was previously mentioned concludes affirming 13 attributes of Allah which were repeatedly mentioned in the Quran, either explicitly or implicitly. These are al-wujud, existence. It means that there is no doubt in the existence of Allah. Al-wahdaniyya, oneness. It means that no one is the creator other than Allah, and there is no other God. Al-azaliyya, al-qidam, means eternity, means no beginning to his existence. Al-baqa, everlastingness, it means that ending does not apply to Allah. Yani, the existence of Allah is not subject to termination. It's not subject to ending. Al-qiyamu bin-nafs, non-neediness of others. It means nothing, and Allah needs nothing, and everything needs Him. So Allah is not in need of our worship. Allah is not in need of our obedience. Allah is not in need of our faith or belief in Him. Rather, we are in need of Allah and in need of His mercy. Al-Qudra, power, which means that God has power over all the mental possibilities. Everything that existence and non-existence apply to it, and the power of Allah Ta'ala is related to it, and it's subject to the power of Allah. So if something can exist at one point and be non-existent at another point, then the power of Allah Ta'ala that it is subject to the power of Allah. And the power of Allah is the attribute by which He brings things into existence and He brings things out of existence. The power of Allah is the attribute by which He makes things be and He makes things non-existent. So if something is not subject to existence or non-existence, then it is not subject to the power of Allah. Yani the power of Allah does not apply to it. And it does not apply to the power of Allah. Like if someone were to ask you about a rock, somebody had a rock in their hand and they said, is this rock knowledgeable or ignorant? Is this rock smart or dumb? So you can't say smart and you can't say dumb, because intelligence and ignorance, they don't apply to the rock, because the rock doesn't have a mind. So then to help you understand that, since let's say we're talking about Allah, His existence is necessary. That means that not being existing, it doesn't apply to Allah. So the existence of Allah is necessary means that non-existence does not apply to Him. Therefore, and we say that it is not related to the power of Allah. So when some misguided people, when they ask an invalid question and they say, does God have the power to create another God? You can't say yes and you can't say no. You can't answer with yes and you can't answer with no. Because the question itself is invalid. Because by definition, if something is created, then it's not God. And if something is created, then it's a creation. It's not the creator. So the question is invalid to begin with. And you cannot attribute impotence to Allah. You cannot say about Allah that He's impotent and that He's weak. And you can't say that it's possible that there will be another God, because that also is impossible. So the proper way to answer such a question is to say that the power of Allah is not related to the mental necessity or to the mental impossibility. The mental necessity is something that the mental necessity is something that non-existence does not apply to. And the mental impossibility is something that existence does not apply to. So it is not subject to the power of Allah. And maybe at another time we'll go deeper into that subject, but that's how you should answer such questions. Al-irada, will, it means that everything occurs in this world by the will of Allah and not against His will. So we don't say that evil exists despite Allah, like the Christians say. The Christians, they say, no, God did not will for evil to happen, but the devil made it happen. This is like saying that Allah got overpowered, or that Allah was dominated. And we say this is impossible. The devil, he is a creation. He's weak. He doesn't have the power to create. So evil exists, good and evil exists by the will of Allah. Al-ilm, knowledge, which means that God knows everything, period, without exception. Nothing is hidden from Him. As-sama', hearing, means that God is attributed with eternal and everlasting hearing, which is without the need of an organ, without the need of an ear, without the need of sound waves. Al-basar, sight, which means that God is attributed with eternal and everlasting sight. He sees everything. He hears everything. He sees everything without an organ. Al-hayatu, life. God is attributed with life, unlike our life, no beginning. And God's life has no beginning, no end. It is not composed of flesh, blood, bone, soul. or organs, a life unlike our life. It's not a physical life. Al-Kalam, speech, which means that God is attributed with an eternal and everlasting attribute that is not a sound, letter, or language. And Al-Mukhalafatu lil-Hawadith, it means non-resemblance to the creation. There is no similarity between Allah and the creation. Because these attributes were mentioned many times in the Islamic text, the scholars said that knowing them is a personal obligation. So we all have to know them. Now I'll do that in Spanish and we'll conclude. Ahora el autor lo que va a mencionar es lo que es conocido entre la ciencia islámica de la creencia como los 13 atributos. Esos atributos son atributos de la realidad de Dios y es una obligación sobre cada uno de nosotros saber esos atributos. Entonces ahora el autor va a mencionarlo. Dice, resumiendo lo antes mencionado, se afirma que Allah Ta'ala tiene 13 atributos que fueron mencionados repetidamente en el Corán, ya sea explícitamente o implícitamente. Estos son el wujud, existencia. Significa que la existencia de Dios es confirmada y necesaria y que su existencia es sin principio y que no hay duda en su existencia. Al-Wahdaniyya, unicidad, significa que no hay otro Dios, que solamente Dios es el creador, no hay otro creador. Al-Qidam, es decir, al-Azaliyya, eternidad, significa que Dios no tiene principio de su existencia no tiene principio. Al-Baqa, perpetuidad, significa que la existencia de Dios nunca termina. Al-Qiyam bin-Nafs, no necesidad de otros, significa que Dios no necesita a nada y a nadie y todos necesitan a Dios. Al-Qudra, omnipotencia, significa que Dios tiene el poder perfecto sobre todas las creaciones. Al-Irada, voluntad, significa que todo ocurre en este universo por la voluntad de Dios, ambos, lo bueno y lo malo. Al-Ilm, omnisciencia, significa que Dios lo sabe todo sin excepción. Al-Sama, oír, significa que Dios lo oye todo sin necesidad de un instrumento y sin necesidad de ondas de sonido. Al-Basar, ver, significa que Dios es atribuido con un atributo de vista que no tiene principio, no tiene fin y no necesita instrumentos, órganos y Dios lo ve todo sin excepción. Al-Hayah, vida, significa que Dios es atribuido con una vida que no es como nuestra vida, no es una vida física. Al-Kalam, con este atributo Dios ordena, prohíbe e informa, no es letra, ni sonido, ni idioma. Y al-Mukhalafatu lil-Hawadith, no semejanza a la creación, significa que Dios no es similar a sus creaciones, Dios no se asemeja a sus creaciones. Estos atributos fueron mencionados repetidamente en el Corán y el Hadith. Por eso los sabios dijeron que saberlos es una obligación personal, fard ain. Significa que cada uno de nosotros somos obligados a saber esos atributos. Y Allah Ta'ala lo sabe mejor. ¿Hay alguna pregunta sobre cualquier cosa? Are there any questions? We'll stop here for today. We covered a good amount. My firm intention is that we're going to make it to the end. So, inshallah, in both languages, hopefully. So, let's see, inshallah, we'll get the blessing of the time. The time will be stretched for us, inshallah. Are there any questions about anything? If there's any questions, طيب. مهلل لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وبارك الله فيكم السلام عليكم